Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at the weekend of August the 30th and 31st, 2025. And this weekend, we do have a first quarter moon. The moon in Sagittarius squares the sun in Virgo, so the lunar cycle is very much underway, and this first quarter moon perhaps represents the first crisis of the lunar cycle. And in this video, I want to take a detailed look at this first quarter moon and also the general planetary situation, but that's not just affecting the weekend, but sort of goes beyond the weekend and sort of perhaps into next week. But before I take a detailed look at the first quarter moon, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for the weekend. And here is the chart for Sunday at midnight, New York time. Here it is. Don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So looking at this chart, we see that the moon is in Sagittarius. So on Saturday, London time, the moon moves into Sagittarius at just after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I think it's at 4 minutes past 3. So if you're in the Americas, Saturday morning, moon moves into Sagittarius. So it's a Sagittarian weekend. And if you're in Europe, well, the first part of the weekend, the first part of Saturday, you do have the moon in Scorpio. If you are in Australia or New Zealand, it's arguably a simpler situation. You can really say that Saturday is all about the moon in Scorpio. Sunday is about the moon in Sagittarius. Now, there aren't any huge events this weekend. I'm not saying there aren't going to actually be any huge events in the outside world, but astrologically, there's not a great deal happening, at least in terms of exact aspects. So, on Saturday, we have a biquintile between Mercury and Saturn. Mercury and Saturn are 144 degrees apart. And so as far as, what that might mean, it's maybe about serious thinking. Perhaps we can make a special effort to organize ourselves and get ourselves together. And it starts with us wanting to be serious. We have the idea of being serious, and then we have to put that into practice. And also, of course, Mercury is a planet of communication. So with Mercury biquintile Saturn, it might be a time for thinking carefully about what we say. Really fine-tuning the structure of our verbal output, and it might be the best way of making an impact. And the moon does move into Sagittarius, and so when the moon moves into Sagittarius, it's sort of early in a positive sign. So that means that it straight away makes a lot of aspects to outer planets. So the moon moves into Sagittarius, makes a trine to Saturn, trine to Neptune, opposition to Uranus, and then a sextile to Pluto. And so these aspects might be quite intense while they last, but those trines, the moon trine Saturn, trine Neptune, these are not especially strong aspects, but moon in Sagittarius, trine Saturn and Neptune, it could be about discipline with that moon trine Saturn, something that we want to say. Moon in Sagittarius, moon in Sagittarius can be quite tactless, but Saturn might bring it under control. So it's a similar picture from the one we got with Mercury biquintile Saturn. Then we got moon opposition Uranus, and that moon opposition Uranus can be a bit sort of tumultuous. It sort of picks up on the new moon. So the new moon, we just had a new moon at 0 degrees Virgo, 0 degrees 23 minutes Virgo, sort of a week ago, and now the moon is picking up on that degree, and also Uranus was square that new moon. So there might be some instability with that moon opposition Uranus, but I'm not saying that it's going to be a hugely significant aspect. And moving into Sunday, and on Sunday we have the moon making a trine to Venus and a sextile to Mars. So there is Venus, and there's Venus and Mars. Venus and Mars making a very wide sextile. I mean, Venus is starting to approach that sextile, but that is a long way off. And the moon, first makes a trine to Venus, and then it moves on to the sextile of Mars. So that means that there is a degree of sort of energy there, especially with that moon sextile Mars. And if the moon is aspecting Venus as well, perhaps from a social point of view, that might be quite useful. It's a couple of aspects which can boost one's attractiveness and one's maybe even one's desirability, but it can also be just generally quite charismatic. And yes, we do have a first quarter moon. The moon is making a square to the sun, and so that precise first quarter moon is taking place at 8 degrees 7 Sagittarius. I make it that first quarter moon takes place on Sunday at 7:25 a.m. London time. So it's sort of going to be very early in the morning if you're in New York. Actually, late on Saturday if you're in California. But for most of us, that first quarter moon is going to be on the Sunday rather than the Saturday, and first quarter moon, I'll be going into this first quarter moon in more detail later in the video, but it might be a call for action, something that we have to do. It's been brewing for a week. We perhaps haven't done much for a week, and now we're thinking, hold on, something has to happen. So that might be how the first quarter moon manifests. So that's the picture for New York. If we turn to Sydney, Australia, as a representative of Australasia, you can see that at midnight on Sunday, the moon is at 29 degrees, I think that's 29 degrees 38 Scorpio. So it's right at the end of Scorpio. And, that underlines what I said, that if you're in Australia and New Zealand, Saturday is very moon in Scorpio. And so as far as what the moon is doing in Scorpio, well, the moon is making a square to Mercury. That's perhaps the main aspect on Saturday. To an extent, it's making a trine to Jupiter. So Saturday there could be moments of irritation with that square to Mercury. If you are in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia, Vladivostok, for example, but it isn't really that momentous, and it might feel that nothing much is going on. Then on Sunday, the moon moves into Sagittarius, and perhaps you experience a real change as Scorpio transitions to Sagittarius. But it's just a matter of timing, and of course that is the problem of doing these daily forecasts for a supposedly global audience. Different people are on different time zones. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. And now the grand trine, which I've been talking about, the heliocentric grand trine, is really quite close. Earth is definitely making a trine to Mars, and Earth is making the trine to Jupiter. Mercury is part of that grand trine. And it could be, when we look at this weekend and what's going on over the weekend, that this heliocentric grand trine is more important than all the geocentric aspects I've been talking about. Maybe not on a personal level, but on a global level, what's happening in the news, what countries are doing, what events are happening, and it is a weekend, but on the surface, kind of looks as if nothing is going on. But when you look at it at a deeper level, as I will be looking at it at a deeper level when I look at the first quarter moon, there actually are some things happening, and one of the things happening, is this grand trine. And the question is this grand trine fortunate? And I think there's an argument to say not necessarily. And the problem with the grand trine is it represents a situation where things can just happen too easily. And what is happening too easily is that Mars trine Jupiter. Mars trine Jupiter. And so Mars trine Jupiter is about power. It's about action, having energy, wanting to make things happen. And so when you've got Mars trine Jupiter, things happen very easily. And the Earth is involved in it as well. The Earth, the planet Earth, where we are, our home, and Mars Jupiter just could be messing it up and just creating events that we hadn't planned for. And so I think with this grand trine that it's probably going to be more negative on a collective level, but on a personal level, it might not be so bad. If we want to get things done this weekend and we don't go crazy and we have some degree of focus, then I think that we do have a chance of covering a fair amount of ground. So, be aware of this grand trine, in this heliocentric grand trine, because, I think that it might be quite significant. And so, that is the heliocentric picture. It's a grand trine that I think we should be focusing on. And now I want to look at things from a viewpoint of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of August the 30th and 31st, 2025. Aries. The moon is moving into Sagittarius, and I think this is good news. The moon has been in Scorpio for some time, and the moon has not always been great in Scorpio. I mean, I've been looking at the comments, and a couple of Aries people with Aries, I don't know, ascendant or sun or whatever, however you're looking at these forecasts, have perhaps haven't been having a great time. And now that the moon is moving into Sagittarius, things should improve. And moon in Sagittarius is about energy, and it's in a fire sign. It provides that spark that recently you might have felt was just missing. And the moon, when it moves into Sagittarius, it makes a trine to Saturn, and it makes a trine to Neptune as well. That's what you get probably on Saturday, and that might allow you to sort of get things together and to decide what you want and how you want to present yourself, and you might have better focus. And then the moon moves on, and the moon makes a trine to Venus, and that trine to Venus I would have regarded as being pretty fortunate. It really is quite motivating, and it allows you to see what is possible as far as maybe the human dimension is concerned. Some people have perhaps not been on great form, or perhaps you haven't really wanted to engage with them, but now that the moon is trine Venus, you start to see possibilities, and it may not just be you changing, but it might also be other people appearing to change. They might be sort of becoming sort of better able to deal with you, but it may just be your perception, and it may just be a virtuous circle. If you have a positive attitude, then other people have a positive attitude, and then you pick up on their positive attitude and you feel even better. So that does look good. And furthermore, the moon moves on, and it makes a sextile to Mars. It's sort of at the end of the day, moon sextile Mars, and that may also say something about other people and the fact that they can be more energetic than usual, and at the same time, at the moment, you are looking for something new. You're not entirely happy, with the way things are. Things have been stuck recently, perhaps while the moon has been in Scorpio, but now that the moon is in Sagittarius, there can be some, exploration. You can see what is possible. There may be things that you had been meaning to find out about, but you had done nothing. But now you're more adventurous, and you can be adventurous with other people's help with that moon sextile Mars. So moon sextile Mars, if you want to try to understand another person's viewpoint, another person's world, you might be surprised and perhaps enlightened. And so, just consider the possibility that other people do have a lot of the answers. Now, there are other things going on, and I just looked at the heliocentric view, and when I looked at the heliocentric view, I pointed out that the Earth was making a grand trine, making trines to Mars and Jupiter. So that Mars trine Jupiter is really quite energizing, and what it's saying is that you are living in a world where there are a lot of things going on. Everyone wants something to happen, and it's not just people that want things to happen. It's organizations, it's countries, it's governments. They're frustrated. They want to move, and you're kind of in alignment with all of this. You understand that need for action, and perhaps you can initiate it. So if you start doing something and you're looking for support, then you could say that you're answering a need. And so perhaps, Aries, you're able to sort of go back into your sort of traditional role of being an initiator. Though, you don't want to be in too much of a hurry. We have a situation where we haven't just got Mars trine Jupiter heliocentrically, but geocentrically, we have got Mars square Jupiter. Now, that square between Mars and Jupiter is not exact over the weekend, but early next week it becomes exact. It's still pretty close. It's only 2 or 3 degrees apart, and so that Mars square Jupiter is about looking for action and wanting to do something. And I think that is really commendable. Though always think about how other people are going to be responding. Yes, it's true that you're answering a need, but you've also got to think about other people, the people you spend time with, and perhaps also your family. Jupiter is in Cancer. It is in a sector of your chart connected with the home and family. So with Mars square Jupiter, there's just some danger that you might go in a tangent. You see something, you get encouragement to go in a particular direction, but you're not carrying everyone with you. And that might be your family, and we might see a fragmentation here, for example, between your family and what your family want, and perhaps friends, associates, colleagues are pushing you in a different way, and there could be a disagreement or a tension there. And so, Aries, maybe that's something that you should try to manage, and don't completely sort of rush off on your own without having some effort to explain yourself. But I don't want to make it too much of a big deal. Looking at the weekend, particularly on Sunday, you have a lot of freedom which perhaps in the past had been denied to you. And if you want to do something, you are probably in alignment with what is going on in the wider universe. Taurus, other people can be exhausting if you take things too far with them, and so it might be a good idea, to think about the various pressures upon you, who you have to deal with, what you're being asked to do, and also do consider your own needs. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you have to consider, cutting off all contacts with other people. It's not about that. It is about, looking after yourself. Some Taurians, they can get very annoyed if they feel that they're being taken for granted, and it happens very slowly. They're being taken for granted over a long period of time, and they're sort of easygoing about it. They appear to be easygoing. It might take years where they get this sort of growing view, and suddenly they get it. Suddenly they understand it, and they can react in quite a not explosive way, but it can be very clear to other people that something has changed. And so perhaps some Taurians are in this state of mind where you think that enough is enough, but there's no need to exaggerate, and you have to remember that this forecast is just for the weekend, and you just do think about how people are treating you. And the key thing is, if you feel that you're being treated badly or not with sufficient respect, that you make it clear straight away. And the earlier you make your point clear, well, the better for everyone, and the more natural and organic it is. And additionally, Taurus, as far as you and other people are concerned, you can be a plus in people's lives. And of course, you don't want to be taken for granted, but there's no doubt that right now you can make people feel better about themselves. You can be positive, you can be enthusiastic, you've got ideas, and if you give someone your time and energy, they can really benefit in tangible ways. So, maybe Taurus, there's a case for, to an extent, putting up with it. You are giving people a lot of your time. You don't feel you're being properly rewarded, but you are having an impact, and that impact, is very real, and it's very fortunate. So, do you want to martyr yourself this weekend? There might be moments when you give people too much, when you spend too much time with them, but it may not be so bad. But at the same time, it's important, Taurus, that you do understand your own limits, and perhaps this is going to be easier once the moon moves out of Scorpio and into Sagittarius. So this movement, well, it could take place on Saturday morning. It could take place very, very late on Saturday, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, or even into Sunday. So, at some stage over the weekend, you might experience a change, and you might start to take yourself, more seriously, and, start to sort of advocate for your needs. Or maybe you don't have to advocate for anything. I think, by the end of a weekend, you are going to be, quite clear about what is important to you. And additionally, the moon is making a trine to Venus. And so with the moon making a trine to Venus, that does allow you to get on with people, but at your level. It's not about you endlessly giving stuff out. You can find people who really, understand you and do appreciate your needs on Saturday, on Sunday rather. But what if there's no one around? Well, the moon is making a trine to Venus, and in fact, the moon is also making a sextile to Mars. But as far as the moon trine Venus is concerned, that can be about you being really very happy where you are, and you understand that things are serious. It's good to be taking things seriously this weekend, particularly on Sunday. You take things seriously, you give it your time and energy, and you feel that you're involved in something that is satisfying, and it's satisfying you, and it is important. It does matter to you. And additionally, the moon in Sagittarius is making a mutual reception to Jupiter. So the moon is it's quite fortunately placed at the moment, and so you are able to tune into your thoughts and the power of your thoughts. And so, looking at the weekend in general, perhaps at the beginning of a weekend, you should be sort of more obliging, consider what other people need, because, you can be a ray of sunshine, but, it can be exhausting being a ray of sunshine. And so by the end of a weekend, as you move into Sunday, you can think more about yourself and your own needs. And in that way, you'll be able to, get the balance right. Gemini, at the moment, Mercury is making a couple of rather interesting aspects. These aspects, they take place particularly on Saturday, and these aspects are a decile with Jupiter and a biquintile with Saturn, and that's really interesting. I didn't talk about these aspects in the introduction. Maybe I should have done, but Mercury is 36 degrees from from Jupiter, and it's 144 degrees from Saturn. And these are apparently quite obscure aspects, but they do focus on the number 5. So Mercury being decile Jupiter, that means 36 degrees is 1/10 of the circle, which kind of relates to 5, because 10 is 5 times 2, and likewise Mercury is 144 degrees from Saturn, so that's 2/5 of the circle. And you might not be interested in this. Perhaps I'm just being too technical, too obscure. But then you're a Gemini. I'm a Gemini, and so if I find this interesting, then you should find that interesting. So if we look at the chart for the weekend and we multiply all the positions by 5, in other words, if we look at the fifth harmonic of the weekend, so let me just show you this chart. So there's the chart for the weekend. Let's set this for Gemini first and just show you what I mean. And so let's just switch this to put Gemini on the ascendant. Now let's just multiply the chart by 5. And so that means every single planetary position, I'm multiplying it by 5. And if a number I get is more than 360, then I reduce it by 360. So when I say multiply by 5, I'm talking about multiplying it in absolute longitude. So absolute longitude means that if you have got your sun, at say 5 degrees Gemini, in absolute longitude, 5 degrees Gemini is 65, because it's 65 degrees away from 0 degrees Aries. So that's what I mean by absolute longitude. And you multiply everything by 5, and then if you've got a number over 360, you subtract 360 and then you convert back to the signs of a zodiac. So looking at the fifth harmonic of of what's going on at the moment. So there you see the Mercury biquintile Saturn. You can see there's a wide conjunction between Mercury and Saturn, and a sort of a wide opposition between Mercury and Jupiter. Now this is a chart set for noon, so midnight of a weekend. So this fifth harmonic configuration is going to be more about Saturday rather than Sunday. So I think I'm really talking about Saturday here and not Sunday. And so Mercury is making micro aspects to both Jupiter and Saturn. It's making micro aspects to the great chronocrators, the rulers of time. And so these are the links you are trying to create. And Jupiter and Saturn are about the world in which we live. The Jupiter-Saturn cycle, it's about a political cycle, it's about an economic cycle, it's about a societal cycle. And on Saturday, Gemini, it would be very useful if you were to think about your role in it all, and trying to make sense of the changes around you. And these are quite dramatic changes, to do with society, politics, economics. And the question is, how do you cope with it all? And this fifth harmonic chart is indicating that you can really think about it, and you can decide what your role is, and you might reach some very important conclusions on Saturday and realize that you have to do something. And the number 5 is about action. It's about your action, what you deliberately decide to do. It's not about fate. It's not about things just happening to you. It's about you deciding that you want to be relevant. You want to be at the center of things. You don't want to just be buffeted by social events, economic events which are beyond your control. You want to align yourself with it all. And we live in complicated times, and Gemini, it's worth your while thinking about it. And it's worth your while aligning to it all. And as a Gemini, you can be open, and you can be realistic, and you can understand what needs to be done. And at the same time, Gemini, this is a time when you're very aware of other people's suffering. At least in a theoretical way. When I say other people's suffering, I'm talking about suffering on perhaps a sort of a global level, or at least a national level. And so you're very close to the heart of things, again, especially on Saturday. And you could, as a Gemini, just look at it and say, oh, well, that's interesting, and just move on. That would not be a good use of today's, or at least Saturday's, energies. Do understand what's going on and make some decisions. That is important. And you make some decisions, and then you decide what needs to be done. And on Saturdays, I think, is a day for really thinking about what needs to be changed in terms of your life, your routines, how you've been dealing with things. And you want to be perhaps the first person to understand what is going on, and what the future is going to bring. And you can do it through your own will. It's not about having some psychic powers or being a prophet. You're just aware of things, and you then want to align yourself to them, and it just makes things so much easier. So that's one theme of the weekend, and I'm sorry to have been rather sort of complicated about things, but I thought I had to point it out to you, the fact that we do have a decile and a biquintile involving Mercury, involving your ruler. So aside from that, the moon is moving into Sagittarius, and when the moon moves into Sagittarius, it depends where you are. If you're in the Americas, then it might be this morning or Saturday morning that the moon moves into Sagittarius. If it's in Australia or New Zealand, it could be very early on Sunday. So it kind of depends. But moon is moving into your opposite sign, and that means that you have to think about other people at some stage, thinking about other people's needs, what other people want, what other people are looking for. And that really applies especially to Sunday. And the moon is making a trine to Venus, and so moon trine Venus is it's a very sort of easy aspect, and I think that you're going to have no difficulty getting on with people and seeing what other people have got to offer. But don't forget, you have got a huge amount to offer, because you've got insight to offer, and that was perhaps about what was going on Saturday. You see the way things are going, and maybe that is something that you can communicate, and I think that people will listen to you. You've got to listen to them. That is the nature of the moon being in Sagittarius. You've got to understand other people's limitations. There are some things that people can't cope with, but you can understand all that. And once you've understood what is happening, then you can deal with the human material around you. And so I think that by the end of a weekend, you're probably feeling quite complete, and you're going to, broadly speaking, be, in harmony with, the various people around you who share your space. Cancer. The moon is changing sign. It's moving from Scorpio to Sagittarius. And so that is an important change for you. It does represent perhaps a change of emphasis. With the moon in Scorpio, you could maybe sort of be more relaxed. Perhaps there was greater scope for just enjoying yourself in your own quiet way. And then moon moving into Sagittarius, well, that might indicate obligation. Whenever the moon does move into Sagittarius, whether it's Saturday morning if you're in California or most of America, or if you're in Australasia, it will be maybe as late as very early on Sunday morning. So whenever that happens, whenever the moon moves into Sagittarius, you start to realize that there are things that need to be done, and you can do them very well. I mean, don't forget that the moon, when it moves into Sagittarius, it is in mutual reception to Jupiter. Moon and Jupiter are in each other's signs, the signs that each other rule. So there's a natural sympathy between the moon and Jupiter. And so whatever it is that's in front of you, whatever it is that you feel that you need to get your teeth into, you can do it, and you can do it very well. And additionally, we have a first quarter moon. So this first quarter moon, the sun and the moon are square each other, and you are reminded that there has been a new moon, and this new moon represented a new lunar cycle. So you moved into sort of something new, and you were perhaps moving in a particular direction. And then with the moon square sun, there is a feeling of maybe something needs to be done. It can't go on like this forever. Perhaps you realize you haven't been putting enough energy into things. Perhaps you haven't been working hard enough. It may be as simple as that. Or you might feel that you haven't been working hard enough. Or you've been in a situation where you've just been concentrating on the wrong thing. So that is possible. But with the moon square sun, particularly as the moon is in mutual reception to Jupiter, this is a chance to really get things moving and to create action, and to perhaps to declare your hand. Maybe you haven't fully revealed to the world what you wanted, and perhaps because you hadn't made a decision. But I think a decision is now starting to manifest. So if there's something that you really want, then maybe you should be clear about it. And you should be clear about it to yourself, because if you're not clear about it to yourself, then what can happen? Well, maybe nothing can happen. And the moon, when it's in Sagittarius, does make a trine to Venus. It also makes a sextile to Mars. I think that those aspects are pretty useful. That moon trine Venus could be about self-interest, recognizing that you do have your own interests that in the past you hadn't properly considered, and it might all sort of tie in with this first quarter moon. You realize you have to do something about it. And so moon trine Venus, you may feel that something has to happen, has to be said, and people have to understand what you want. And if you are clear about your needs and what you expect, then I think that people will listen to you. You could argue, in fact, that we do have a grand trine as well, because the moon, the moment it moves into Sagittarius, it makes a trine to Saturn, and then it makes a trine to Venus. And so this grand trine in fire signs is, for you, it is very concentrated on your needs and what is important to you. So, on Saturday in particular, Sunday in particular, then, be open and honest. And if something needs to be done, make sure it is done. And I think that you will get your way. And as far as relationships are concerned, if relationships matter to you, the moon is trine Venus. I mean, moon trine Venus is a great aspect for relationships. It does allow you to get on fairly well with people, but additionally, it allows you also to push your own agenda. So it's not like you doing things for other people, you being at their disposal. No, you can be very clear about what you want, and I think that people will understand it. So relationships can take place in a manner where your interests are definitely catered for. And also that moon trine Saturn, that is a great aspect for relating to other people, and relating to other people in quite a serious way. Perhaps you and someone else have the same ideas and the same goals, and you perhaps have got sort of different talents that can be quite sort of complementary. So, so overall, Cancer, I think that it does look like being a very productive weekend. Leo, there is a first quarter moon over the weekend. What takes place on Sunday, I think, for most of us. And first quarter moon, if you're a Leo, that does matter. I mean, the moon is square the sun, so that might mean that you have to think about what needs to be done, and things can only move in a certain direction so far until you reach a stage where you've got to work out what you have to do in a very definite and constructive way. Perhaps you have to assert yourself, and maybe at some level you don't really want to assert yourself. It's easier to do nothing, and that might be your feelings on Saturday. You're happy where you are. Why should you do anything else? What's the point? And then there is this change with this first quarter moon, and it is, I think, for you a call to action. And the question is, how do you go about it? And this first quarter moon perhaps emphasizes your power and your lack of power, or your perceived lack of power. Perhaps over the last couple of days, you felt you couldn't do much. There was no point. And this might have been reinforced by the fact that it's a weekend. Saturday, what are you supposed to do on a Saturday? I know people have jobs on a Saturday, but Leo, you prefer to do nothing on Saturday. But there are definitely things to be done. And this is what perhaps the first quarter moon is about. It's about doing things and standing up for something. And standing up for something that is really, very important to you. And if you want to really, show the world who you are and how much power you can bring to bear, I think you very much can. So, don't underestimate yourself, because you can create change, and you can also do it in such a way that it seems to be fun. So it's not like doing anything that is boring, other people aren't interesting, they're not just not interesting. You might be worried, they're not interesting and they're not interested, but that's not true. If you really think about who you are and what you can do, then I think that you really can achieve a great deal. And additionally, the moon in Sagittarius is making a trine to Venus. Venus is in Leo, and so with Venus in Leo, take advantage of it. the planets aren't quite done with Leo. Mercury and Venus are still in your sign, so do take advantage of them. And with the Venus in Leo, Moon making a trine to Venus, that means that throughout the weekend you can come over as being a very pleasant, attractive person who has definitely got something to offer, especially on Sunday. And so there is something exciting about you, and you can take this excitement and you can fix it. And by fix it, I mean make it permanent. And that might relate to the fact that we've got a grand trine in fire signs, kind of. I mean, we've got the moon, when it makes moves into Sagittarius, it makes a trine to Saturn, makes a trine to Neptune, and then it makes a trine to Venus. So whatever it is that excites you, that you want to talk about, you can make an impression, and it can be quite a lasting impression. And don't forget your own inner power. At the moment you have considerable amount of power, and if you want people to listen to you, to pay attention to you, they will. I mean, you might have to do something. You might have to perhaps do something dramatic and just refuse to compromise for a bit. When people realize you're serious, they'll fall into line. So Leo, the weekend might appear to be going nowhere as you move from Friday into Saturday, but by Sunday there's a lot going on, and I'm just hoping that you're able to take advantage of it all. Virgo, Mercury is your ruler, and on Saturday Mercury is doing some interesting stuff. I mean, I went into it in great detail when I was looking at Gemini. And so to repeat some of what I said to Gemini is that Mercury is making a decile to Jupiter, and it's making a biquintile to Saturn. So what that means is that Mercury, your ruler, is making minor aspects to both Jupiter and Saturn, and Jupiter and Saturn are the great chronocrators. They are the rulers of time, and Jupiter and Saturn as a pair are telling us about what's going on in the world, perhaps from an economic point of view, social point of view, cultural, political. So they're very much about how things unfold, and Mercury, your ruler, is making these micro aspects to Mercury and Saturn. Now they are micro aspects. A decile and a biquintile. Decile is a tenth of the circle, and these micro aspects are very much connected with the number 5, and the number 5 is a very human number. It's about what we are trying to create through our sheer willpower. So it is about your will. And so Virgo, what you should be trying to do is you should be trying to understand what is happening. And this is especially the case if recently there have been setbacks. If, for example, these setbacks might be to do with jobs, or you felt that you couldn't get the kind of work you were looking for. Maybe you felt also that things were leaving you behind. That maybe it was to do with technology, society. It's moving on, and you're just standing there, and that can be a very disconcerting feeling that you are being left behind. But there's no need to be left behind. And I think that with these aspects on Saturday, with Mercury, decile Jupiter, biquintile Saturn, you have an opportunity to really understand what is happening, number one, but number two, to create a plan for yourself. You can get an insight, and if you don't have that insight, you can force the insight. So, for example, on Saturday, you might sit down and think, well, I'm feeling left behind. What am I going to do? And if you really use your willpower, things will start to be clear. I mean, you've got to be open and honest about what the situation is, but you can be, and then you can make a conscious decision that this is going to end, that you are going to be at the center of things from a sort of a cultural, political point of view, and that you're going to not just understand, for example, the way the economy is going, but you're going to be able to benefit from these changes. So, don't feel lost. It's unnecessary, and with these aspects, you can start to realign yourself. I mean, I know that sounds a bit heavy and complex, and it's not perhaps what your plans were for Saturday, but my job as an astrologer is to show you what is possible. And, it's up to you whether or not you want to take advantage of it, but I think you can, and I think it's something that you very much want to do. And as Saturday moves into Sunday, the pressure might lessen, and you might feel that you just want to bide your time. And as the moon moves from Scorpio into Sagittarius, you might be sort of feel that you need a break from it all. But when the moon moves into Sagittarius, we do have a first quarter moon, and that first quarter moon does matter, because remember, we had a new moon a week ago, and that new moon was in the first degree of Virgo. So that was the beginning of the Virgo season, at least from the perspective of the sun moving into that sign. I mean, okay, we still got Mercury and Venus in Leo, but they will eventually move into Virgo. And so that was a new beginning for you. It might felt itself to be a new beginning, but over the last week you're perhaps wondering, well, okay, now what? And now you've got a first quarter moon. That is the call for action. This is the first crisis in the lunation cycle. And so with sun square moon, you have to think about what you need to do now. And it could be, Virgo, that you realize that it all begins at home, that you need to sort out your living arrangements, where you live, whether you own your home, whether you rent, whatever the situation is, you need to sort it all out and make sure that everything is in order, that you're comfortable with it all. And at first it won't be easy, but I think in the end it will become clear, and by the end of a weekend you can feel a sense of belonging. And of course that sense of belonging is going to be much easier if, as I suggested at the beginning of this piece on Virgo, you really start to think about where you fit in with these wider collective cycles, and how you can make yourself relevant, or make yourself continue to be relevant, as we see these changes in society and technology and everything else. So that might be something that you want to think about on Sunday. So Virgo, could be quite a serious weekend, but I think it's a weekend that in its own way could be quite enlightening, and perhaps what you should be really trying to do is align yourself to the future. Libra, the moon is moving out of Scorpio into Sagittarius, and when the moon moves into Sagittarius, it makes a load of aspects, and one of those aspects is a trine to Venus. So it's always good to have moon trine Venus. Venus is your ruler, and so over the weekend I think that you can be a happy and friendly person, and I think that by and large people are going to like you and they're going to enjoy your company. And at the same time, Libra, you have a lot to say, you have a lot to communicate, like yesterday, but perhaps sorry, when I say yesterday, I mean Friday. This was starting to develop on Friday, but over the weekend it's becoming stronger, and I think that there's so much you can communicate, and you're able to make people feel good about themselves. And additionally, you can make yourself feel good about yourself. So really try to focus on the positive. I know that one can be too positive. One can take things too far. I mean, that's always possible. But this weekend is not really a time for Librans to be overly negative. You need to think about how things could really work well, and don't limit yourself. Don't just not think about something because it seems too complicated or seems too difficult, or perhaps it's something that you had not succeeded at in the past. Well, the past is the past, and now things are changing. And so, Libra, be enthusiastic and do listen to what other people are saying. And if other people have plans and are themselves excited about something, don't just dismiss it. Try to latch on to other people's enthusiasm, and even if that enthusiasm seems half-hearted, latch onto it and encourage it. And that would then mean, Libra, that you can be a force for good. And if you can make other people happy, then you'll be making yourself happy as well. So that is, as far as I can see, a major plus about the weekend. And the moon, it doesn't just make a trine to Venus; it makes a sextile to Mars. So Venus and Mars are being brought together by the moon, and Venus and Mars are the two relationship planets. And the moon in Sagittarius, it's quite well placed in Sagittarius, especially as it's in mutual reception with Jupiter. And so that says something about how you articulate yourself. And you're able to say a lot, and people are going to enjoy it. And it's not just about what you're saying. It might also be about where you're deciding to go over the weekend. So if you're doing sort of short distance traveling, and especially on Sunday, then a change of location, a change of scene, might be very fortunate. So perhaps you spread your joy in one place, and then maybe you want to spread your joy in another place. But it's not just about you giving stuff to other people. It's a two-way process, and you can pick up on other people's enthusiasm, and that can be supportive of you. And even if you're planning on spending the whole weekend alone, it doesn't matter if that's the way you normally like to have your weekends, and nothing wrong with that. It's still about the mind, and it's where your mind is going. And I think that at the moment you are optimistic, you are positive, you can be. You've got lots of ideas, and so do make the most of them. Scorpio. I looked at the heliocentric picture. I looked at the heliocentric picture on Friday as well, and I talked about the heliocentric chart. And that heliocentric chart is quite active for the weekend. Remember, the heliocentric chart is where you put the sun in the center of the solar system. And if you look at the heliocentric chart, here it is. Just a reminder, Mars is at 8 degrees Scorpio heliocentrically. I know it's in Libra geocentrically, but the Earth is making a trine to Mars, and Jupiter is making a trine to Mars. So Mars, your ruler, is highly emphasized heliocentrically, and I think that you should take advantage of this. I mean, it does indicate, Scorpio, that you have a lot of energy. There are a lot of things that you want to do. You have a lot of power, and this is a time when you can sort of reveal yourself and show what you can do. So if there's something you feel is important, make sure you do it. I mean, do it in a way that is relatively disciplined. I mean, one problem about Mars trine Jupiter heliocentrically, and of course going back to the geocentric chart. Let me just set that for putting Scorpio on the. Sorry about this. Just a moment. Let me just put Scorpio on the left where it should be. Going back to the chart for the weekend, the geocentric chart for the weekend. Mars is square Jupiter. So, there is Mars making a square to Jupiter. So we've got Mars square Jupiter geocentrically. We've got Mars trine Jupiter heliocentrically. I mean, I think that the heliocentric trine somehow feels more pressing from the square, and it does indicate to me that you can make things happen very easily. And so, don't assume that things are pointless over the weekend. There's just no point in doing anything because it will be a failure. It won't work. You won't have enough energy. You'll give up halfway through. It's not like that. If you decide that something is important, Scorpio, and you give it everything, then things will fly. I mean, things could fly. And you don't even have to give it everything. You just have to maybe make that first push. You make that first push and just everything starts to move. And additionally, okay, we start the weekend with Moon in Scorpio. Now, the Moon, it moves through Scorpio for some of Saturday. I mean, maybe all of Saturday if you're in Australia or New Zealand. And, that sounds good. But, the Moon in Scorpio, it's moving into late Scorpio. And so that's not necessarily that much of a big deal, the Moon in Scorpio. Then the Moon moves into Sagittarius, moves out of your sign. But that might be when the action starts because, when the Moon moves into Sagittarius, it makes a trine to Venus. And of course, Venus is in Leo. Venus is in a fixed sign. Venus is in a high-profile part of your chart. And so that Moon trine Venus, and the Moon goes on to make a sextile to Mars. It is very motivating. So it's more of the same. So I think, Scorpio, you should have plans this weekend. And you should, be thinking about, what needs to be done. You might think at the beginning of Saturday, as the Moon is moving through late Scorpio, that it's all done, it's all over. There's nothing much more that you can do. But that would be wrong. You need to have a follow through. And, if you've got energy, if you've got the desire to do something, Scorpio, then, make sure it happens. It would be a shame if you were to waste that grand trine involving Earth, Mars and Jupiter. But you do have to be careful. We don't want energy just getting out of control. But you're a Scorpio, you're a fixed sign. You know about focus, and so if you get that focus right, I think that it could be quite a spectacular weekend, in its own way. Sagittarius, the Moon is moving into your sign. And, when the Moon moves into your sign, it is in mutual reception to Jupiter, because Jupiter is in Cancer. And this might sound rather repetitive. Now that Jupiter is in Cancer, Jupiter's been in Cancer for some time. Jupiter will stay in Cancer till next June. So, every time the Moon moves into Sagittarius, into your sign, I can say, oh, well, Moon is in mutual reception to Jupiter. So that might sound a bit boring. I mean, I suppose that is the nature of doing daily horoscopes. You do see things repeated quite a lot. But, it's perhaps just a reminder that having Jupiter in Cancer is just good news. It's a good time for Sagittarians. And, it allows you to focus on the things that are important, and it also allows you to just tune into your own power. And so, that's why every time the Moon goes into Sagittarius, and Pisces, arguably, because Pisces is a sign that is ruled by Jupiter, your luck can, all things being equal, improve. So, do take advantage of this time you're in. Jupiter's not going to be in Cancer forever. Time flies. June of next year, it might sound a long time, but it's not. Before you know it, Jupiter will be in Leo. And I'm hoping that you're able to really make the most of what's happening. And so with the Moon moving into Sagittarius, mutual reception to Jupiter. Things look pretty good, and I think that you're going to be lucky. And additionally, you're not going to be stupid. You're going to take things seriously enough to be able to look after your own interests. But you don't have to be too serious. And the moon, when it moves into Sagittarius, it does make a trine to Venus. So moon trine Venus, that is, and it's also making a sextile to Mars. So that means that you have a lot of energy. You can be, if you want, the life and soul of a party. If you're going to any parties, there's something about you that is larger than life. And so if there's something you want to communicate that goes beyond the here and now, you shouldn't be thinking that you've got all of the answers. And moon trine Venus might be about you seeing things in a new way, a new and elevated way. But also with moon trine Venus, you can benefit from other people. Maybe someone around you has got ideas and got thoughts which you could be really very fortunate for you if handled in the right way. If you have sufficient imagination. Yes, I mean, imagination is important. Do be imaginative. Think about what is possible. And I talked about seriousness just now, but where is the seriousness really needed? It could be, Sagittarius, that there is just something that you have been neglecting, something that you're good at, you're good at, but you haven't really bothered with it, and you've just let it slide, and it kind of gets you every now and then, but you're just you never get it together. But if you were to put some effort into it this weekend, something you'd been ignoring, something you felt, you've forgotten it, you're in the process of forgetting it, but it's only the process of forgetting it. If you get it together now, something you were involved in maybe a few weeks ago, even a few months ago, you can bring it back to the center. So what is it? Is there something you're guilty about? Something you're guilty about ignoring and neglecting? And if that is the case, then this weekend, do something about it. And one reason you might want to do something about it is because we've got a first quarter moon. First quarter moon, you've got moon in Sagittarius, square the sun in Virgo. And this first quarter moon is about action. We had a new moon a week ago, and that was all well and good. But now, what are you going to do about it? And you might realize that something has to be done, especially on Sunday, and that something has to move. Now, part of that might be going back over old territory, thinking about something that you've been neglecting, something that you could have been practicing on, but you didn't. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. But also, with this first quarter moon, it's about projecting yourself and realizing you need to project yourself. And I would say that in some respects, Sunday is the first day of a week. There's always this question about, is Monday the first day of a week, or is Sunday the first day of a week? But I think for you should regard Sunday as being the first day of a week. It's not the end of something, it's the beginning of something with this first quarter moon. So what is it, Sagittarius, that you want to project and get on with? And the second day of a week is Monday, by that logic. And so Sagittarius, get moving. What is it that is important? And don't hold back. And it's certainly not a time to be lazy. Capricorn, it could be a weekend where there is something that just needs to be understood in your own way. And this might relate to the lunar cycle as it's been developing. So we've just had a new moon a week ago. And with this new moon in early Virgo, I think that this new moon, as far as you're concerned, was quite fortunate. It allows you to see things in a new way, and the question is, how have you responded to all of this? Just because you see new opportunities and you see new ways of doing things, it doesn't necessarily mean that you actually act on it. You might just take the view, oh, well, that's very interesting, and just carry on as always, carry on as before. But, there is now this first quarter moon. The moon is square the sun, and first quarter moon, it goes back to the new moon. But the question is, what are you doing? And how are things going to progress? And it might be the case, Capricorn, that you need to stop and think. And perhaps there were things you were planning on doing over the weekend, and you were just going to carry on in the same old way. But now you might just stop in your tracks, and there just might be something that you need to think through in your own way, and you can't necessarily get anyone else's help. It's just something you have to work out. And once you give yourself that space, things will become clear, and you'll realize what can be done. And as you move through Sunday, as the moon makes a trine to Saturn, and then it makes a trine to Venus and a sextile to Mars. So we actually have a grand trine. So we've got a grand trine involving Saturn, involving your ruler. So with moon trine Saturn, moon trine Venus, it's a grand trine, but it's very personal. It's not a very sociable thing. I mean, I know that Venus is involved, but Venus is not just the planet of relationships. It's a planet that perhaps relates to your own inner balance, and also it can relate to your own ambitions. And you are starting to see things in a new way. And moon trine Saturn, I said that you might not get any help from other people. Moon trine Saturn might represent someone who is prepared to be of assistance, who's prepared to give you a different view. That is possible. And help and advice and assistance, well, it might come from an unexpected quarter. So that is a way in which moon trine Saturn could have a social dimension. But more fundamentally, this grand trine involving Saturn, involving your ruler, it is energizing, and it's energizing, in quite a sort of a private way, and you understand the way things are really working, and things may start to click, and you might reach a conclusion that something has to happen. And you might be helped by the fact that Mercury is making a biquintile to Saturn. Now, that biquintile to Saturn is on Saturday when the moon is in Scorpio. So perhaps that Mercury biquintile Saturn is, more about the beginning of a weekend. Maybe it's what kicks the whole weekend off. So Mercury biquintile Saturn, Mercury Saturn 144 degrees apart. So it's about Mercury, which is about thinking. It's about ideas. And you may be forcing yourself to think. You don't want to think. You'd rather do something else. But if you make the effort to think and to integrate the ideas that you have been perhaps developing over the last week, since the new moon, and you can do it through a conscious effort, things could really start to make sense. And as you move into Sunday, there might be a clarity, and you'll know, kind of what you're expected to do. So the weekend probably isn't going to be much fun, if fun is your main priority. But you're a Capricorn. There are more important things than fun. But if you're able to really sort of take on board what is going on, then I think that, you can reach some very important conclusions. Aquarius. The weekend starts with a biquintile between Mercury and Saturn. Now, that might sound quite an obscure aspect, but it does involve Saturn. It is a biquintile. I don't think biquintiles need be obscure. And the biquintile is about you making a conscious effort. It's about your willpower, you deciding that you want to do something. And it may be that you make a decision that something needs to be thought through. If you disregard other people, there's something that you want to do on your own. You want to have some sort of private thoughts about something. Maybe you want to read something to inform yourself, and because you know that something's missing. And through your own efforts, perhaps through your own intellectual efforts, you can find what is missing, and that can allow you to make the right decision. So that's one way in which this Mercury biquintile Saturn could work. Alternatively, Mercury biquintile Saturn might be about a conversation that needs to be had. So it's not a conversation that is necessarily very natural, but it's something you've got to force. You decide you need to talk to someone about a particular subject that might have been bothering you. And as soon as you're able to talk about it, things start to make sense. And through conversation, you can really assert your will. And it's very clear that there's something you need to talk about. And the person you're talking to, or maybe the people you're talking to, it's more likely to be one person rather than several people, will understand what's important to you. And that means that there can be a resolution. So that looks pretty good. By and large, I would probably have said that Saturday is a more serious day than Sunday. The moon does move into Sagittarius. Things do start to lighten up. And so on Sunday, you might be feeling, more sociable. And, there is a grand trine in fire signs, believe it or not. Okay, this grand trine in fire signs might be more about Saturday if you're in the Americas. But, it's still, we've got moon in Sagittarius. We've got Venus in Leo. We've got Saturn and Neptune in Aries. So yeah, there's a grand trine feel to the whole thing. And so perhaps on Sunday you can just start to feel the energy, and the change is very, very clear, and you start to be enthusiastic, and there are a lot of things you can talk about, not just to one person but to lots of different people. And yeah, you are sociable, and people like you, and relationships of whatever nature, you will be able to deal with the challenge and be able to make a special effort to relate. And there will be something about you, Aquarius, in the end that is quite exciting. Maybe not Saturday, but certainly by Sunday you can come over as being an exciting and interesting person who has some, great ideas. And so, don't assume, when you start the weekend, you might think that it's kind of going nowhere. But the weekend quickly picks up, and it has different phases. I think the first phase of the weekend, more about Saturday, is about you having serious thoughts about yourself, and then realizing that these serious thoughts need to be discussed. That is a possibility. If not, read a book. Through reading, you can support your own conclusions. You may feel that you're moving in a particular direction, but you need to be supported by it, and you read something that just makes perfect sense. So that may be another aspect of the weekend. So overall, the weekend sort of gathers pace, and so by the end of the weekend, things really are moving. Pisces. We have the moon moving into Sagittarius eventually, and Sagittarius, from your viewpoint, is quite a high-profile sign. It's about what you want to do. It's about what you want to achieve, and there is a grand trine in fire signs involving the moon. So the moon moves into Sagittarius. It makes a trine to Saturn, and it then makes a trine to Venus. And so Pisces, that might mean that you feel really very, very motivated, and you can see that things really are starting to move, and you can make things happen. And of course, Pisces is not a fire sign, it's a water sign. And so with that watery nature, Pisces might have a certain reputation for being reflective and passive. And maybe that's the case on Saturday, especially if you're not in the Americas. But as the weekend progresses, as this fiery grand trine starts to kick into gear, then you have your own excitement, you have your own spark, and people will notice you, and you can make an impression. And furthermore, when the moon moves into Sagittarius, it makes a mutual reception to Jupiter. Moon and Jupiter are in each other's sign. Jupiter is your ruler, so that really does allow you to have an impact, to get noticed. But it's all for a reason. It's not just about you having fun. I think you can have fun, especially on Sunday, but it's also about you thinking about what is important, what matters right now. And so if there's something you need to sort out, perhaps on quite a sort of material level, just organization, that might be one aspect of it. It might be money, it might be planning for whatever you're planning on doing next week. Perhaps there's something you want to do, you want to sort out. Get it all together, and you can do it with great enthusiasm. And so because you come over as being enthusiastic, you're going to get quite a lot of support. And so if you want to do something that under normal circumstances would receive sort of resistance, I don't think the resistance will be there. So I do think that you have considerable freedom over the weekend. And while you're at it, Pisces, you might realize that there is something you've been neglecting, something that you could be really very good at, but you have been neglecting it, and you haven't been paying it enough attention, and you're in danger of forgetting it. And you know that it could really work out for you, but things have changed, things have happened, and you now think that it you did think that it wasn't important, and you forgot it, but now it's because now you feel bad about it. And so if there's something you have neglected, particularly as far as your skill set is concerned, then I would suggest that you give it another go, you give it another chance. It just may be that just a few minutes of refreshing your memory, a few minutes of practice can take something which you thought was fading through neglect. It can become part of your life again, and I think that that would be a big positive. So those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and it's now time to look at the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 63, which is after completion. So this hexagram, first of all, indicates that something has been done. In the sort of I Ching world, or that might be crossing a river. We've reached the far bank, and so there might be a feeling of relief. Okay, we've done something. It's completed. It's over. But it's not as simple as that, because once we've made a transition, then the problems might start. Perhaps one problem is that we're in sort of new territory. There has been a change, and we're not fully familiar with the rules. And I Ching, warns of chaos in that sort of after completion stage, but things are starting to break down. There is that possibility, and that's so often the case, isn't it? We have this supreme achievement. We've done something. We feel that we've completed it. We're really happy about it, and then what? and we don't really have a plan. And that's when things can go wrong. Now, the first thing we might feel is that something is gone, even that something has been taken from us. And the image that the I Ching gives is of a woman in a carriage, and she has a curtain sort of protecting herself, because the I Ching says, well, in ancient China, it's not good for women to be seen in public. So, they should, if they're moving from A to B in a carriage, you need to have this curtain to protect them from outside view. And then it talks about losing the curtain. What happens when the curtain is gone? And the I Ching tells us that we shouldn't chase after this curtain. We should, because it will come back. Something like after 7 days, but don't worry too much about the 7 days. And so, generally speaking, we feel we've lost something. It may not be a material object. It could be a material object, or we may feel we've lost an opportunity, or it could be that we feel we've lost credibility. And perhaps is more relevant to a woman in a carriage who's lost her curtain, and people can look at her. That seems to be a bad thing in ancient China. And so perhaps you feel that you're not being respected anymore, or that you've lost people's confidence. So that might be what you're feeling as you move into the weekend. And if you do feel that way, the I Ching is saying, well, don't worry about it, because it will come back. There's no need to go rushing after it. And another view, I think it's the Wilhelm I Ching is saying, well, the Wilhelm translation is saying, well, you've just had a change. And so when you've had a change, you've got all sorts of people rushing around, looking for offers, looking for recognition, getting jobs perhaps which they don't deserve. But that's what happens after a revolution, and maybe or a change. And so maybe you feel that other people are getting more credit than you, and that this situation is unfair. And again, don't worry about it. Things will settle down, and there's no need to do too much. The fifth line moves, and the fifth line moves with the fifth line moving. It's saying, well, you don't have to make too much of an effort. The person who makes the huge offering, the huge and expensive offering, is not necessarily the person that gets all the credit. You need to do what you can do, what you can afford. Your humble efforts are good enough. And that's sort of a reminder of, was it in the Bible, Jesus comparing someone who offers a very small amount of money compared to the people who are offering huge amounts of money. You've got to look at the situation. And so, you can offer what you can afford, you can do what you can afford, and that is good enough. And that's perhaps a reminder that this weekend, it is about modesty. It's not making a real effort to impress. Other people might try to be impressive, they might boast and whatever, but in the short term, it might be worth a while, but in the long term, your true worth is going to be recognized. And if you feel you've lost something, then it does seem that you will get it back. And we've got two lines moving, and so that means we move to a second hexagram, and the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 11. Everything is in order, peace. We've got 3 unbroken lines at the bottom, making up the bottom trigram, 3 broken lines making the top trigram. So by the end of a weekend, things will resolve, and you will stop worrying, and you'll stop worrying about relative positions and worrying about other people getting too much credit and being treated unfairly and so forth. Everything will make sense, and everything will be in the right order. And peace, that's one way of looking at it. Greg Winkup in his translation of I Ching, he talks about it. I think he describes this hexagram as flowing. So things will start to move, in the end. So if at the beginning of a weekend you're feeling that things aren't working, that you've been compromised, you're disadvantaged, don't worry about it, because I think that things will resolve themselves. So that's the I Ching. And I want to finish by looking at the first quarter moon and some of the other things going on astrologically, perhaps relating to midpoints. And so the precise moment of the first quarter moon. So here is the chart of the first quarter moon. Here it is, setting that for Sunday at 7:25 a.m. London time. So you can see that the moon is at 8 degrees 7 Sagittarius and the sun is at 8 degrees 7 Virgo. I don't know about what your chart looks like, but if you've got for example, if you've got a point at 8 degrees mutable, that full moon might be particularly important for you. I mean, I say that because my sun is at 8 degrees 13 Gemini, so I'm sort of thinking about what this first quarter moon is going to mean for me. Perhaps I need to listen to my own advice, saying, well, you've just had the new moon, and had the new moon a week ago, and now you've got to get it together. Maybe I've got to get myself together. I've got to sort some things out. So it's talking to me because I have my sun at 8 degrees 13 Gemini. But in general, the first quarter moon is a time where we have to think about what we've been doing over the last week and deciding, what we're going to do now. And there may be that first feeling of urgency. It is the beginning of something. We had a week to just work it out, to think about it. We didn't necessarily have to do anything, but now the pressure is starting to be on. I mean, it's not overwhelming pressure. I mean, the real pressure comes in a week's time when we've got the full moon, but we're not there yet. Then, of course, we've got a last quarter moon, which is the absolute last chance to do anything, your last chance saloon of the lunation cycle. But, this is the first quarter moon. So what does this first quarter moon tell us? I mean, how should we perceive this first quarter moon? So on the face of it, this first quarter moon, does not have any sort of dramatic aspects. There's nothing else at 8 mutable. But, if we look at the midpoints, we may get a clearer idea. So if we put the first quarter moon on the 90-degree dial, we can start to look at some of the midpoints that it occupies. So it being a 90-degree dial, conjunctions, squares, and oppositions are shown as conjunctions, whereas semi-squares and sesquiquadrates are shown as oppositions. So there is the first quarter moon on the pointer, and the midpoint that strikes me is the Mars-Pluto midpoint. So this first quarter moon, being on the Mars-Pluto midpoint, is that right? Yeah, Mars-Pluto midpoint. So the Mars-Pluto is, it's quite a dramatic pairing. Mars-Pluto is about power and how much power we should be using, and feeling that we have to do, everything we can to get what we want. I mean, that is an aspect of Mars-Pluto. Feeling perhaps we have to push things to the absolute limit. And in a general sense, that might be how this first quarter moon feels. That, we want to make an impression, and we perhaps don't care what the price is. Whatever the cost, it has to be done. So that might be about us. It might be about what people are doing out there. We don't have to be influenced by first quarter moon on hitting the Mars-Pluto midpoint, because we're individuals. In the grand scheme of things, we might not have a huge amount of power. We can do our own thing. We don't have to get caught up in Mars-Pluto, but other people do. other people who have authority, who have influence. And that may say something not just about the weekend, but, the week ahead, between now and the full moon. And so that's one sort of aspect of this lunation. And there are other things. There are other midpoints it's on. So you can see that there is a Mars Hades aspect this weekend. Let me just show you this Mars Hades aspect. So let me just. So here's a chart of the full moon. So let's now show you the hypotheticals as well. Let's throw the hypotheticals in. So, that's not what I wanted to show you. So what I wanted to do was show the hypotheticals, including Hades. So there is Hades. Where's Hades gone? At 15 degrees 23 Cancer. And you can see that Mars is at 15 degrees 26 Libra. So, in other words, at the time of this full moon, at the time of this first quarter moon, there is an exact Mars-Hades square. And that means that the Mars-Hades square is imprinted, because the first quarter moon, that precise moment of the first quarter when the sun and the moon are exactly square, is something which imprints. It imprints onto our world, planet Earth, the power of the Mars-Hades square. And the Mars-Hades square is difficult. I mean, Hades is a planet of death, destruction and decay, and you link it with Mars, and it's pretty unpleasant. I mean, if you look at Alfred Witter and what he says about the Mars-Hades principle, he says about Mars-Hades as a principle, he says it's fatigue, weakness, atrocity, vulgar acts to cause damage, base services, male servants, slaves, sudden attacks, murder, homicide, unusual death, serious sickness, faulty or bad actions. So there's a wide gamut of events that can be categorized as Mars Hades, and it's not good. And so that does give you an idea about Mars and Hades. So going back to the chart. So that Mars-Hades conjunction taking place at the same time as the first quarter moon is sort of linked with Pluto. So we have the first quarter moon is on the Mars-Pluto midpoint, but it's also on the the Pluto-Hades midpoint. So that might be cause for concern. So, I mean, I think that there is a hint here that this first quarter moon, may not be as innocuous as it seems to be on the surface. When we look at the midpoints, and there are other midpoints to consider at the same time, which are perhaps not directly associated with the first quarter moon. And there is a Uranus midpoint, which I probably should have pointed out, but I didn't point out. And Uranus is on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint. You see, there's Mars, there's Jupiter. So Uranus is on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint, and it's also on the Jupiter-Hades midpoint. So, Jupiter is a planet that brings things out, out into the open. Mars-Jupiter, we've got this Mars-Jupiter square triggered by Uranus. And, Uranus on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint, you could say, is successful action, successful, dramatic and unexpected action. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. But I think that also Uranus on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint could just be action, And remember, we also know that heliocentrically we've got a Mars-Jupiter trine, and I'm quite neutral about that, neutral to negative about that Mars-Jupiter heliocentric trine. So this makes me think that this weekend, may not be easy, and there could be some event, something that we weren't expecting, that we should be on our guard. Okay, it might be this weekend, okay, it might be over the coming week, but it's something that we have to be careful about. And so that Mars Hades is not to be underestimated. One other thing I noticed was the Cupido midpoint. Cupido is the planet of love, although Cupido was the first Cupido was the first planet of that was supposedly discovered or developed by the Uranian school of astrology. And of course Cupido was first developed during the First World War, when Alfred Witte was trying to predict the First World War, not the Second World War, the First World War, when he was trying to predict Russian artillery barrages. This was the Tsarist Russia, not the Soviet Union. Tsarist artillery barrages, and because he couldn't use, he found that the traditional set of planets wasn't giving him what he wanted, so he reverse engineered the whole thing. So he noticed the times of artillery barrages in the past, and then he linked it with a hypothetical planet, which became known as Cupido. So although Cupido is a planet of love, you could also say that Cupido is a planet of artillery barrages, although that's not really mentioned as far as I can see in the literature. Maybe I'm wrong on that. I haven't perhaps read enough literature on it, and plus it does help if you know German for the Uranian school, and I can't read or write German, so that is a bit of a disadvantage there. But if we look at the Cupido midpoint, there is we can see that Cupido is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. It's also on the Mars-Neptune midpoint, and it's on the Mars-Aries midpoint. So Cupido, the planet of love, the planet of associations, the planet of union, the planet of marriage, is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So at the very least, it's a very bad weekend to get married. I mean, what does Cupido on a Mars-Saturn midpoint mean? Is that a shotgun wedding, whatever that is? It's a wedding that is not perhaps going to work well if anyone is getting married over the weekend. Okay, reality is that marriages can happen under terrible astrological influences, and they can work fine. So perhaps I'm being a bit flippant there. But it's interesting to note that John F. Kennedy had Cupido on his Mars-Saturn midpoint. So here is John F. Kennedy's chart, and so looking at Kennedy's chart from the viewpoint of the 90-degree dial, we put his Cupido on the pointer, just to give us an idea about what Jupiter on the Mars-Saturn midpoint can be about. And Cupido on the Mars-Saturn midpoint can say something about how one dies, because Mars-Saturn is the death axis, or the death pair. And so Kennedy died in public, and he died pretty much sitting next to his wife. And so dying in that kind of situation, remember, Cupido is not just a planet of artillery barrages, it's also the planet of love, marriage, union. And so in certain situations, you can look at the Mars-Saturn midpoint, what planets are on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, to get an idea of someone's death. And, being assassinated in public next to his wife, you could say, is a very powerful symbolism of Cupido on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So if you happen to be a president this weekend, it's with Cupido on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, it's not a time to be driving around in an open-top car with your wife. but I'm sure it's not going to be quite like that. But still, I think we need to watch Cupido on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and maybe it's not a great time to be getting married, for example. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about today, about the weekend. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again very soon.